Good morning, philosophers, YouTubers, friends, neighbors. I always sound like friends, Romans, countrymen. Lend me your ears, right? Famous speech, look it up. Is that by Shakespeare or by Cicero? Check it out. That's like a quiz. So I look at philosophy YouTubes quite a bit, right? And I've got mine sort of in the same lineage, I think, and that these are the conversations I like to pursue or the recommendations I like to pass on. I think we need to, as human beings, recommend to each other and curate links and so on, and not always rely on search engines. Like when I was imagining hypertext, it was very based on tour guides who knew their way around, like Linus Pauling knows chemistry, and then he would link up all these chemistry sites that he thought were good. What we're going to do in this YouTube, by the way, is it's not going to be too long. We're going to jump around in Wikipedia some. I want to show you how to marry up or merge what we call the IVM or isotropic vector matrix with just established jargon that already frequents the various web pages so that you can transition back and forth between honeycombs, matrices, lattices without too much interruption in your thinking. It'll be a smooth kind of hypertune experience to go between convex uniform honeycombs and in particular the alternated cubic honeycomb and what we call the isotropic vector matrix, right? I'm going to show you how to do that, but there's our old friend, right? Tetrahedrons and octahedrons. Now we call those volume 1 and volume 4. And the other part of this YouTube, besides jumping around, pinball around in Wikipedia a little bit, is I'm going to jump into this Jupyter notebook, School of Tomorrow Jupyter notebook, kind of just using it as Calculator of Tomorrow, kind of as a scratch pad. And just remind you how in the Martian math, volumetric mensuration system, i.e. the way we measure volume, is centered around this regular tetrahedron over here with all blue edges. And that's our unit. But if you take this sort of, think of this as a book that's open, right? A triangular cover book with triangular book covers. The two book covers are lying flat on the table. This is a table, right? Let me shrink this down a little bit. So they're on this, there's a tetrahedron on the table and there's a cube on the table. But the tetrahedron is what we call a tetrabook. So this page in the middle that's pointing straight up, and this where the finger is, that's got the same edge lengths as when it's in any other position. It just arcs back and forth. And when it gets flat to the table, it lines up with either cover because they all have the same length. D for diameter, like two spheres touching each other. The distance from one sphere center to the next is the same as the diameter across the sphere, assuming uniform sphere radius. Okay, so this tetrahedron with the standing up, that should be a 90-degree angle, imagine. This is, the page is straight up and down. This volume actually happens to be the same as that of a cube with edges half as long. So these are edges D, which is 2R, and the cube has edges half that long. But the volumes of these two are the same. That's why I'm using the green to link the two. And it's bigger than that of the regular tetrahedron with the same edge lengths. Except this is a longer edge length when we stand it straight up. And so if we call this 1, then by contrast, this regular tetrahedron will have a volume of second root of 8/9. And if we flip it around and say this one is 1, then the smaller one, then the XYZ tetrahedron, we could call it, will have a different volume. It will be bigger than 1, right? And the way you find it is you multiply by the square root of 9/8, second root of 9/8. It's like a currency exchange, right? Going from American to Canadian dollars or USA to Canadian dollars, whatever. Back and forth, back and forth. That's all we're doing. And I can derive S3 mathematically in this Jupyter notebook, right? By saying, hey, in the XYZ reckoning, a cube with sides second root of 2 would have a volume third power of that, because that's how we say volume in XYZ. Third power equals rectilinear operation of some kind. Whereas IVM cube has a volume of 3, even with those same edges. And it's the ratio of those two that gives us what's called the synergetics constant that we use to go back and forth at the volume level. We sometimes call that S3. And here's its numerical value, right? 1.06066, whatever. Which means you'd want to multiply the volume of the little guy here, the blue tetrahedron, by that S3 number to figure out its volume in of the bigger one, right? So here's the XYZ ball, which is 4/3 pi r to the third power. That's the spheres that are packing in our close packing, right? And the density that you have, if you just take pi, the density comes out at 0.74 whatever, 0.74048. So in our world, in Jupyter Notebook worlds, all we need to do is multiply that ball's volume by S3 to figure out what its volume would be in IVM or tetravolumes. And we come back with another number, which when divided by the volume of the Voronoi cell or rhombic dodecahedron is the same number, right? We get all the same ratios. Because we're not really doing anything except applying a scale factor to the honeycombs. And that's all we're doing. As far as the jargon of the honeycombs, it's pretty easy to connect them. So close packing of spheres is already there. Now what if I type isotropic vector matrix, which is what we say in synergetics, IVM, isotropic vector matrix. Where can I find that in Wikipedia? And it takes me straight to space frame saying redirected from isotropic vector matrix. So this is where we end up. And what do you know? It's the same honeycomb, right? It's the sphere packing honeycomb. And you can curve it. You can do other things with it. You know, it's got architectural significance here. But when you scroll down to the bottom, and also Fuller had the patent on it there for a while, you've got your link back to the tetrahedral, octahedral honeycomb, which is already connected from all of the honeycombs, like it's a subtype of honeycomb. They sometimes call it the alternated hypercubic or whatever. There is a way you can think of it as alternated in a following sense. Remember, if you have, here's the Voronoi cell, the rhombic dodecahedron. The tips of these are in neighboring cubes that are, we could say, empty. They don't have sphere centers. Whereas at the center of this is clearly a sphere center. It's kissing its neighboring spheres through the mid-cube edges. I have several videos on that, actually. So we're just trying to be clear on the same geometry they're being clear on here in Wikipedia. It's the same geometry. It just has, we have, coming from our philosophical niche, our mooring in synergetics, we come into this subject with a somewhat different vocabulary, but it's really easy to see the connections, right, all over the place. So this is the isotropic vector matrix, we could say, but if we want to talk more like a mathematician in North America in 2019, we might want to adjust our speech a little bit and talk about a space frame and a honeycomb, right? So the Jupyter notebook here is titled Honeycomb Density, and we're just going through this ratio that we call the density of such a packing. And they're actually infinite CCP-like packings, because when you layer the balls, as we've seen, if you pack in Triville, you have twice as many valleys as you need and have a choice. I have a Squaresville versus Triville meet, which I'll end on. Actually, let's see how quickly we can find that. Let's go to Google and type in Squaresville, Triville, IVM, and see if that takes us there. Squaresville, that's like ordinary math. Actually, no, that's a kind of way of looking at the FCC or the CCP. IVM, Grunch. Okay, Google, do your thing. How good are you? Grinch wants to go to Grinch. No, 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 no. So this was what we call not a good search. So let's try something else. Grunch sphere packing. Now Grunch was Fuller's coin. Hey, that looks good. And you can look it up. It's very easy to look up Grunch. Not quite the same as Grinch, but clever to have that Dr. Seuss connection. So this is Triville. When you're looking at the FCC in a particular way, it looks like pool balls, right? The way you rack up pool balls. But if you look at the same packing from another direction, you get the Squaresville or Mayan temple, like the half octahedron, where you're packing squares atop squares. You can think of it that way. When you're doing Triville, you have choice about how to do the next layer, and you could name those layers. I mean, you could permute how you go, kind of like a random walk turtle falling down through a Pascal's triangle, whatever. Anyway, call those Barlow packings if you like. That's what John Conway suggested in one of our interactions. Barlow packing for FCC, or let's call it CCP, HCP, but then in addition to those, how do you go from there? Like, those only specify how it works between three layers, CCP and HCP. But as you keep going, there's, the way you do the oranges in the supermarket, you can get fancy as to how you pack, right? But it's always the same density, and we can just call them all Barlow packings if we want. That was a crystallographer. Remember I said Applewhite was pretty interested in Bernal? And remember, some of the crystallographers were joking that Applewhite was the Ayatollah of the tetrahedron. I have that in my blog too. So we'll leave it at that for now. That's our tour. It's easy to jump between Space Frame, which is where we hang out as the architect side of Fuller. Alexander Graham Bell is very much in there with his tetrahedral truss. We've talked about that quite a bit. And then we can jump from here. By the way, when you get to the bottom of this, you're in a Buckminster Fuller tour, right? So from here, we can jump straight to synergetics. Like, it all works pretty well here in Wikipedia. I'd say we are successfully merged. Tessellated octahedral honeycomb. Take that somewhere, drive on the Tensegrity Highway to get somewhere else interesting, and you're going to find out a lot about a lot of things pretty quickly. All right, good chatting with you, and talk to you again soon.